So let's talk about goodwill, because this is something that comes up every now and then in calls or whenever I work with people, and people seem not to understand the concept of goodwill in accounting. Essentially, whenever we discuss goodwill and how much something's goodwill, a business's goodwill is worth, what we are actually measuring is it is an intangible asset, so it's not something you can palpably touch. And this is the difference between the assets and the liabilities. So if we have 5 million in assets and 4 million in liabilities, you will have £1 million in goodwill. And it's something that's hard to grasp for people sometimes. They think the business's goodwill is a lot higher than it is actually possible whenever we talk about numbers and accounting. So whenever you value your company, whether you are selling or you're not selling it, the question of goodwill always comes up. How much is my business's goodwill? And I've seen people make it up on the fly. My business's goodwill is 200 grand or 5 million pounds or whatever. I do remember working with a gentleman who owned a post office, who really said his goodwill was £500,000. Basically, he wanted £500,000, and that was his way of saying that the goodwill of the business was £500,000. And this was literally a figure that was plucked out of thin air. And it's something that never materialized. The business never sold. And the business, it's dead now. It's a local post office. And so whenever you talk about goodwill and valuing a business, you have to be very careful whenever it comes to these numbers, because the reality of the matter is that you're not going to be able to sell it if you pluck numbers out of thin air. And this happens all the time. So the one key factor that I want you to take away from goodwill is, if your business is so different, if your business has such a product or service that is so unique and so good, is it reflected on your company's margins, your gross margin, your net margin, and the overall profitability of the company? If you are saying that your company's goodwill is X and it's a lot higher than what I have accounted for, does that get reflected on the margins? Does that get reflected on the growth of the company? We see companies like, like Apple, for example, like Google. We see companies like Visa. Visa has a gross margin of 98%, net profit margin of around 50%. If it does get reflected on your margins, then your goodwill will be a lot higher whenever you go to sell the company. Because I am going to look at the company, I am going to look at the profitability, and I'm going to be really, really surprised at your profitability and how much money you're making. And someone is going to pay up. Someone is going to pay more money for that business. But if you say your goodwill is £500,000 and your net margins are 11%, well, I'm gonna beg to differ, and I'm gonna go back to accounting, and we are not going to put the amount of goodwill you want to put down on the business. So that is something I want you to look at whenever we talk about goodwill. And does it get reflected in margins? If someone were to buy your business and pay above the value of your net tangible assets, then how much would that be? Is it justified? And how do we account for it? It's an intangible asset, so it is a matter of opinion sometimes, but those opinions need to be factored in operating margins, in net profit margins, in overall growth, in profitability, in capex, the debt to equity ratios. It's not just something you say, my company's goodwill is X. my company's goodwill has to fit with the overall profitability and the overall business. And if you want to learn more, please go to mycompanyvalue.co.uk, and I'll see you there.